Hi, everybody. Welcome to Global Tech Tales, where we hear stories by IT leaders and editors from around the world about the latest technology and leadership topics. I'm Keith Shaw, co-hosting along with Matt Egan. He is the Global Content and Editorial Director at Foundry, also representing the UK. Hello, Matt. How you been?
I'm very good, thank you, Keith. How are you doing today?
Good, good. So we are tweaking the show a little bit. We are now going to be hearing from editors and IT leaders in some pre-recorded segments, and we're going to show that a little bit later. But we are still starting the show off with some of the latest statistics. And today we are talking about IT careers, but specifically around the topic of upskilling employees so that they have the skills necessary to succeed with the technologies of tomorrow, especially AI. So I dug around and found a couple of stats, and what I found interesting was that there is a big gap between companies that recognize the need for upskilling and training, but they just haven't yet actually produced a lot of the programs. For example, a survey by Pluralsight suggests that 75% of companies have experienced delays or pauses in at least one or more AI projects due to a lack of employee AI expertise. 35% said half or less of its employees have developed AI skills, and 38% of respondents said half or less of its departments have adopted AI skills as part of training programs in day-to-day use. And then there was one other stat that I found that said a Microsoft LinkedIn survey said 66% of leaders would not hire someone without AI skills, yet only 39% of employees using AI have been trained by their company, and just 25% of companies planned to offer generative AI training that year. I think that they are going to be offering more training as we move on, but it still seems like there's a big gap here, Matt.
Yeah, for sure. And who trains the trainers, right? I think we're at that really interesting point of the, I don't know, hype cycle or the development of the AI age, however you want to describe it, where, like, I'm not even sure lots of organizations fully understand what they mean by AI training or AI roles. Do they mean very specifically working with AI to do specific things, maybe using agentic bots, or do they mean like roles that have been impacted by the use of AI in the kind of internal structures and processes, infrastructure of an organization? There's just lots of unknowns, right? And
Right.
you know,
Yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, even in the way we think about the impact that AI might have, you do hear some pretty smart people, I don't agree with them, talking about how everybody, who's senior is fine because they're going to be strategic, but there isn't going to be a kind of a junior tier of staff. Does everybody become a senior leader managing bots? I don't think so. Where does the next generation come from? What's the impact on culture, future workspace? The truth is, I don't think we fully know this, but it's really interesting and important to hear from people in industry who are doing this stuff and have some
Right.
insights to share.
And I think that there's also a bunch of stats I've seen where employees that are being asked about, hey, do you want these AI skills? And they're overwhelmingly saying, yes, we want the skills. Please give us the skills. And I'm afraid of what might happen is if companies don't deploy upskilling and training, that employees are basically going to take it on themselves to try to do this, and they
Yeah,
might not get the same kind of training that an employee-sponsored program might. But also, I think that they don't want to necessarily just have to like watch a PowerPoint to
yeah.
learn. That the way that they're trained has to be better than what maybe like a security skills awareness
Yeah,
training is, for example.
yeah. I was just thinking about that, like, or the very important, fire safety video or whatever, like where it's some guy from a
Right.
from an 80s soap opera, like 100%, right? Because it's new and it's exciting, and it's about people being empowered to explore and develop new skills. I think several things, right? I think you have to give people actual time and resources to do the training. I think a lot of organizations pay lip service to the idea of exactly what you're describing, right? Hey, we found a video on LinkedIn. Everyone has to watch this kind of thing. And I think you made a really good point, which is if you don't provide the space, the tools, and the direction to allow people to experiment and try, they're going to do it anyway. And that has an impact on the IP of your organization, because if they're just chucking stuff in ChatGPT, you are allowing information to walk out of your business. So I think this is a very tricky line for organizations to tread. They have to do it. There's no option.
Right.
You have to do it in a
Right.
way that means everyone's aligned around a broader mission and maybe even a strategy, but they have the space and the investment in knowledge to be able to develop skills that were not very well defined at this point. I think it's a really interesting and challenging situation.
All right, so for our next segment, we're going to throw it over to Valerie Potter. She is from Computer World, and she had a chance to talk with an IT leader adopting a whole bunch of tactics in this upskilling and training areas. So over to you, Val.
With me today is Jeff Foster. He's the Director of Technology and Innovation for Redgate Software. Welcome, Jeff.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, pleasure. I should also add that Jeff also blogs independently on Substack, and I'll be referring to some of his writings there during our interview. So let's jump right into it. Today we're talking about tech careers and specifically developing tech talent. And as a director of technology and innovation, I think this is something that Jeff can speak to. So for years we've been hearing IT leaders say they can't find tech workers with the skills they need to fill open roles. And the skills gap has only gotten worse as new AI technologies have accelerated the pace of change. So more and more companies are turning to upskilling their existing employees to help fill that gap. So what are some of the approaches Redgate takes to upskilling your tech workers?
That's a great question. I think it's important to realize with technology that it's constantly evolving. Like upskilling isn't a choice you have to make. It's kind of an imperative. Organizations must upskill, otherwise they're getting left behind. In terms of how Redgate does that, I think one of the first principles we operate from is we always try and hire curious folks. And that means people who have a thirst for learning. And you might wonder how you find such people, right? And that is hard. One of the simple filler questions we use is just to ask people, what's the last book they read? What's the last technology they played with? What makes them excited? That can give you a great impression of whether someone has that curiosity and that mindset to learn and adapt. Another principle we try and put in place is before you introduce a technology, you really need to understand the why of that technology. You need to feel the problem that the technology is trying to solve. So, for example, if you're trying to learn Kubernetes, a container orchestration framework, and you haven't felt the problem that Kubernetes solves, it's going to feel like an overcomplicated solution to a problem you haven't got. The way you can create that space for people is to not run workshops treating things in the abstract. It's to give people a chance to play with that technology and run into those problems themselves so they can discover those solutions and learn to put them into practice. Some of the ways we try and do that at Redgate, we have this thing called 10% time, where we give up every Friday afternoon for people to embrace learning and development. And that might be through lightning talks. It might be through trying to fix a particular customer issue in a new and novel way, or it might just be trying to get to grips with a new technology, with a toy application, a Slack bot that orders lunch for the team every Friday, something akin to that. And the final way I think is really important to upskill people is to expose expert thinking. And I think that's really key to see the decision-making process in action. And again, one of the things we've put in place, and it's taken a long time to get this actually showing value, is architecture decision records. So when we ask people to when people make changes to software at Redgate, we ask them to fill in a short description of why they're doing it, the options they considered, and why they chose the path that they chose. I think we put this in about 5 years ago. Now we've got a library of almost 500 architecture decisions that detail why we did something, and sometimes a few years later, why we were wrong about that. And that's brilliant. It's that organizational repository of knowledge that new starters can look in to understand why the decisions were made. They might be wrong. We're still going to make wrong decisions. Everyone does, but at least you can see the thinking process underneath.
And I would imagine that prevents you from making the same mistakes again if you understand, the thinking that went behind a decision and then that didn't turn out to be the right decision. It would sort of steer you away from that path again later on.
That's part of that curiosity mindset. It's that old adage, I think it's Chesterton's fence. Understand why the fence post is there before you remove it. So if you understand why the particular technology choice is there, no matter how weird it is, at least you're not going to fall into that trap of removing it without understanding the consequences.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I imagine that 10% time to also maybe introduces problems that not necessarily introduces, but makes the company aware of maybe problems you didn't realize were there that the employees have discovered, and or that they're just curious about that maybe weren't on the radar, and then they become that way. Do you have any examples of those types of things?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess some of the things that have come out for 10% time relate to the way we do our internal processes at Redgate. So one example I can think of is the way we did continuous integration. Um, we had a really complicated process for building our software. We used to refer to it as build magic, and everyone put air quotes around the magic because it worked and it was magical, but boy, was it complicated. 10% time, we had a new starter come in who took a step back at that problem, looked at why the magic was there, carefully understood the reasons why, and came up with something radically simpler. Once we could see that kind of innovation in action, we were able to take that out and roll that across the teams. And I'm sure there's millions of little examples where people explore a problem from a different angle on a Friday and then take it into their work on a Monday.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. So we're talking about developing tech talent, which is helping them, but it sounds like it's equally as important to help your team as a whole develop and the whole company.
Yeah,
Uh,
if you're not keeping up to date with technology, you can bet that your competitors are, and the whole road is moving forward. You have to get on it.
yeah, exactly. And so you have we've sort of hit on this already a little bit, but you've written in your blog about the need to help tech workers get past the expert beginner phase, and develop a more holistic understanding of the technologies you're working with. So can you talk a little bit about how you help them get there?
Yeah. So that expert beginner, there's a wonderful blog article. I'll send you the link afterwards, and hopefully we can share it in the article. But it's a brilliant model of understanding. The expert beginner is the person who gets themselves to a state where they realize, or they think to themselves, if I understand all the rules of how software is written, I don't need anything else. I just apply the rules. And lo and behold, I'm an expert software developer. But the problem the expert beginner is making is they're confusing confidence for competence. So they've seen a little bit of the world and they've made some rules because of that, and they're going to stay fixed in that mindset forever. So I think the job of leaders is to push people gently and with the necessary level of support into situations where playing by the rules doesn't quite work. So you've got to find those situations where glibly applying a list of rules from a textbook somewhere just doesn't make the software that works for our end users. And it sounds really hard. Like, how do you find these opportunities for folks to go into difficult situations? But this is software. There's never a shortage of weird and wonderful occurrences to explore. So, for example, at Redgate, we deploy software onto our customers' machines, and they use it in their environments. Their environments are weird and wonderful. So we
Hmm.
might our software with 100 databases, with 1,000 databases, but we deploy it to a customer with 10,000 databases, and something will go wrong. Not all the time, I should add, in case Emma's listening, but not all the time it goes wrong. But sometimes the weird and wonderful does happen. But that's a brilliant learning opportunity. That's an example to find where your carefully scripted rules of how you should design and architect software just breaks down when you get to a certain level of scale. And over time, the more you expose folks to those situations, the more you build up that kind of pattern matching library so that they can understand those different patterns. They can understand when to break the rules, when to play by a new set of rules, and when to break the rules yourself if you're doing something truly novel. So I guess I'd say the key thing of pushing folks past that expert beginner is to expose them to as many different situations as possible.
That's great. And this may lead into my next question, which is, so skills per se are only part of the equation. But so how do you help them develop and pursue their career goals?
That's another good question. And this is going to sound like a really obvious answer, right? I think the first thing to do is really truly understand what the folks on your team want to achieve. That sounds like everyone should do that. But I bet there are folks listening who've never asked their people that question or never been asked that question themselves. It was one of the things that surprised me about Redgate was a conversation in the first week of joining the company about, hey, where do you want to go from here, Jeff? Once you understand where people want to go, I think it's your job as a manager to help them get there, to determine whether it's the right path for them. And I think, again, that's about giving people the opportunities to taste those roles before stepping into them. So, for example, if someone wants to step into a leadership type role and they're currently a developer, maybe the first gentle step on that road is just having an intern over the summer so you can get used to the idea of managing a single person. Over time, you might turn that into something more substantial. For example, at Redgate, we run a yearly conference ourselves for Redgaters by Redgaters. Organizing that is no small task at all. But we found that's a great task to give to someone who's looking to step into management, project management, to understand the complexities of running a complicated system. And again, it's not just sort of pushing people off the cliff and hoping that they succeed. It's about giving them the support. And that support might come from mentoring, it might come from the line manager themselves. But it's important to create that kind of safe to fail environment. If someone's managing an intern, there's always someone else to step into if it doesn't quite go right. It's not someone organizing the conference on their own. They got the support of experts. So creating that right balance of fun opportunity, slight nervousness about the complexity of it, and the support to go alongside it. I think that's the key.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being my guest on Global Tech Tales. I really appreciate your time and insight.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
We are now joined by Valerie on the show to chat about what Jeff had to say. Welcome to the show, Val.
Hi, thanks.
So, when you were doing this interview, what was your biggest takeaway from the discussion? I think that there were a lot of things that I thought were really interesting, but, from your perspective, what was the biggest takeaway?
I think it was getting people to have real world experience. So as you're developing people's skills and understanding, I mean, one of the things he kept coming back to was actually understanding the technologies and, why decisions were made. And so part of that was, tying it into real world situations. So it's not just learning. He talked about something called the expert beginner, and right. That is somebody who knows all the rules, and so they know why software works the way it does, and why, so they think they know it all at that point. And then when you actually get into real world situations, it gets a lot messier. Unexpected things happen, and if you really actually understand the why of things as opposed to the book learning about it, you're going to be a lot better able to deal with it in the real world. So. And
Jeff was from the UK, and he threw out this phrase, and I wanted to ask Matt about this. He mentioned Chesterton's fence, and so I had never heard that before. Is that something that's common knowledge over in the UK?
No, but I really liked the way he articulated that, and what it sort of told us about. I mean, right. I think it really, that and the whole conversation really spoke to something Val was just speaking to, which really resonated. Great interview, Val, which really resonated with me, was around making real these concepts of upskilling, and that all comes back to the why, right? So I love the fact that when they was talking about tactics like 10% time. It's not just saying it, right? It's doing it. And when they talked about sharing expert voices, I really like that. One thing that really sang through for me, and again, it is more tactical, but was this idea of, from day one, understanding where the individual wants to go, which I guess speaks to the why, and then allowing them to test and taste those. So whether it is using technology to get to the next level, or whether it is literally managing someone, who might be an intern, but that idea of, if we want to upskill someone, we put them in a position where they're actually and actively doing it. I thought it was a fascinating discussion.
Yeah, I was really impressed by that 10% time concept where they basically told the company every Friday, for a number of hours, this is the time where either work on a project or learn about something or, there's a speaker who's attending. And so, dedicated time during the week for training. I think a lot of times companies get into this mindset of, well, we're going to just do training and we're just going to send out this video and then you watch it on your own time or work it into your schedule. And that might feel like you're, because employees have different things, but I did like that carving out of time just to focus on training. Any thoughts on that? Or do you prefer it where they just allow companies or employees to do it on their own time?
Oh, absolutely not. Not make them do it on their own time. That's actually one of my bugaboos, I would say. I think I've brought that up more than once, that I really disagree with the thought that you just throw a bunch of materials at people and say you figure it out.
Well, not least because that tells you how much of a priority it is for the organization, right? Again, what really came through in the conversation was the why, to your point about we're not just doing this to be good people. We're doing this because it's critical to our organization that our staff are continually upskilling. Therefore, we're putting in place the resources. And like I say, yes, that might be the sharing of expert voices. That's a good cultural thing to do. The yearly conference he spoke about, which was really interesting because he said, we have a yearly conference. It's not a small endeavor. That's important. But at the same time, we may bring someone in and as part of their upskilling, they run the yearly conference, right? So that is putting aside a lot of time and resources on behalf of that individual and saying your focus right now is to build the conference, but in doing so, you're going to learn and develop your skills. It all speaks to me about the idea that this organization has decided it has a sincere commitment to upskilling. And the why is because we need to do it. We're a software business. We need to keep developing great, simple, magical solutions kind of thing. It is that kind of, to use an English idiom, it's putting your money where your mouth is, right? It is saying, okay, we've said we're going to do this. We're now going to invest and resource to do it.
Right. And even early on in the interview, Jeff said this thing that really resonated with me where he said, we hire curious folks. And, Jeff, that's the first step is if you are in an interview and you notice that someone is not curious, that they're only interested in doing one or two things, that might, hinder later training. So I think, even just asking them like, what's the latest book you read? What's the latest, technology that you've been interested in? That can really show if someone is curious or if they're just interested in being an expert in just one thing. I find that fascinating just as well because I'm always looking to try new things in my own, both work life and personal life. So I thought that was really cool.
And one thing that I really appreciated too, and maybe this is my biggest takeaway. I don't know. There were probably like 4 biggest takeaways, so
that's okay.
It's hard because he said so many interesting things. But this is not. They're not doing one thing for training and development. It's the orchestration. It's everything.
Right.
They're hiring curious folks right from the get-go. They're interviewing those folks. Soon, once they get started and they learn the ropes and how things are done, they're talking to those people and saying, what could we do better? They're recording everything every time they make a change to the software. And one thing I really appreciated, a little aside he said when he said this was, we started recording, every time a change is made to a software, the developer or engineer says why that change was made, right. all the things they considered, all the paths they considered taking, and why they went with this particular path, why they made this decision. And he said sometimes we went back later and we were like, well, that was wrong. But now we know. Now that is in the record as well. Yeah. So then when the new people come in, they look around and go, why should something be changed? Or should anything be changed? What are we doing? I may actually I interviewed him about a few other things, so maybe I'm actually bringing in something that happened from a later interview. I'm not sure, but it all ties together. So he, a new person came in and he reviewed all the documentation. Okay, this was why this software was this way, but I still think that it could be simplified. Yeah. And so so they very carefully went ahead and simplified it, and it was it was listening to the new people is what made them see that they had overcomplicated this.
Right. And I think there were a couple of moments where he was talking about an overall environment of not to fail, or basically creating a safe to fail environment. And even when he was talking about the weird and wonderful, I love that phrase. And he brings up that there was an instance where they were deploying the software to 100,000 databases or something like that. And a lot of companies, when their software might have a bug in it or they break, they immediately go to the this is awful, and they yell at someone, or they ask about, like, they point the fingers. And rather he was saying, well, this is a training opportunity to figure out some more learnings and some more opportunities to train. And so I feel like sometimes companies don't create that environment where it's safe to fail. And so that also kind of it resonated with me. Matt, any final thoughts?
No, well, I mean, I will yes and that, and what Val was saying earlier. Like, all of this stuff only happens if top to bottom the organization has a sincere commitment to it, right? So, like, and we only have his word for it, but it's a very successful organization. Like, and culture doesn't start top down, right? It has to be everywhere, but you have to put in place, like, the mechanisms, the rules, the processes by which these things happen. So I thought that was a really interesting example, the safe to fail. The fact that when something, lots of organizations talk about learning from failure, but to actually actively do it, you need the things Val was just talking about. You need to have the documentation, the record, the process of going back and learning, inviting new, maybe junior people to give their feedback. I thought it was really interesting, and I thought it was quite practical as well, because all of these things can be done within an organization. You just have to decide to do it and commit to it. So yeah, again, wonderful interview, great interviewee, great job, Val. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Val, you also mentioned that you had talked to Jeff about some other topics, and so we will have some bonus clips on the site in a couple weeks. But what other topics did you talk to Jeff about around the IT career space?
Well, one of the topics was changing culture as an IT leader. So, and that was a really interesting discussion. And then finally, we went into the elephant in the room, which is AI and tech careers, and how that's going to talk. I mean, so Redgate Software is mostly about software development, of course. So we first looked at it at the software engineer level, but then also pulled back and sort of what does it mean for IT workers in general. So, and those are both really interesting discussions as well.
All right, so we're treating these like bonus clips on the DVD for everybody that remembers what a DVD was. All right, thank you, Val, and thank you, Matt. As always, we're going to be back next month to talk about cybersecurity in the world of AI. If you like this episode, be sure to add some comments below. Check out other Tech Talk shows, such as Today in Tech, CIO Leadership Live, First Person, and Demo if you are looking for product demonstrations. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.